The Christian Church of Raleigh was begun in 1881 by the Reverend William G. Clements, who served as its first pastor. He also raised the funds for the erection of the first church building on Hillsborough Street. He was born in Fletcher's Chapel in Wake County. In 1861, he volunteered for service in the Confederate Army. He was wounded 3 times, and finally, in 1862, his left arm was shattered and then amputated at the elbow the next day. His first work of note was to establish an academy at Morrisville, where he taught for several years, and later became superintendent of public instruction in Wake County. He settled at Morrisville and organized the Christian church there. In 1868, he was married to Annie E. Mooring, a descendant of James O'Kelly, and changed his membership from Baptist to the Christian church with her. He was licensed to preach later that year and was an active ordained minister for over half a century. Besides the Raleigh and Morrisville churches, he organized others at Chapel Hill, Mebane, Six Forks, Franklinton, Amelia, and Mount Auburn. He was president of the North Carolina and Virginia Christian Conference and the Eastern North Carolina Conference.
In 1792, James O'Kelly, who was a lay minister in the Methodist Church, rebelled against the hierarchy of the Methodist Church, the bishops and the sending ministers there. And so it began with that group, the O'Kellyites, as they called them, who spread throughout North Carolina, Virginia, and Kentucky. They decided on the name Christian. They had 6 principles. And the one that always I hold to me is the one I will point out to you. The Lord Jesus Christ is the only head of the church. Christian is a sufficient name for the church. I've always held on to that. Christian is a sufficient name for a follower of Christ. The Holy Bible is a sufficient rule of faith and practice. The Christian character is a sufficient test of fellowship and of church membership. The right of private judgment and liberty of conscience is a right and privilege that should be accorded to and exercised by all. The purpose of this church will be consummated, and this is big, in the reformation of the world and the union of all Christians, which was a big help.
We came to Raleigh in 1922 when we were first married. I was a bride, and my husband had come in the spring to work for the State Department of Education. I came in September. I went to the Tabernacle Baptist Church, being a Baptist, and then my husband went to a class at Edenton Street. He was a Presbyterian. And we tried the Presbyterian Church and didn't like that. Later on, we heard Dr. Perry. He spoke at some place, and we heard him and we liked him. So we went down to the First Christian Church, which was being built. We had to go to the women's club to meet. We joined the church in 1924. We've been there ever since. Dr. Kirby encouraged integration. There was a time at State University, then called State College, that they couldn't have desegregated meals or a desegregated dinner. Consequently, Mr. King, who was the secretary of the Y, the father of Cy King, couldn't hold any integrated dinners at State University. And there had to be a segregated area at public meetings at State for Negroes. Now, the United Church dared to have dinners for blacks and whites together down at the church, even in the 20s, and particularly at the beginning of the 30s. Raleigh Times, mid-1950s. The United Church, located in the fringe area of Raleigh's downtown business district, is made up of Congregational Christians and Friends. Of the 250 members, more than 50% come from denominational backgrounds other than Congregational Christians and Friends. Allen Robinson came to the United Church of Raleigh as pastor in 1938 and remained until 1946. In 1939, he started the Institute of Religion. He was an outspoken man, including with his own congregation. On September 30th, 1943, he penned a letter to his congregation that included the following. Being a liberal church, we have sometimes overemphasized the importance of the sermon rather than the worship. If the minister was going to talk about a subject of particular interest, we attended. If not, we allowed other matters to claim us. Consequently, we have perhaps fallen into the way of consulting our convenience rather than our conscience in this matter of church attendance. On this latter score, I think it is time we liberals did a little rethinking. Either the worship of God is the most important thing we could do, or else it is just childish play acting that sensible adults had better give up. Our belief in God may be different from our neighbors, but certainly it means as much to us, or else it means nothing at all.
On April the 8th, 1936, it was significant that the business board, that's what we used to call the church council now, we now call the church council, with 17 members present, held a lengthy discussion, quote, as to whether colored people will be welcome at our church services. And the general sense of the meeting held favorable.
The original Sunday Forum class at the United Church of Raleigh was called the Open Forum class. A 1955 article by Peggy Hoffman describes a period in the 1950s when the deacons offered babysitting services. It was aimed at young parents with children, and the purpose was to free up the parents to attend a church party and meet other folks in the church to become acquainted. Peggy Hoffman describes this picture. Fanny Bell and Susie are visiting with the children. We used to have square dancing every Saturday night, and Joe Clark came up with the idea that the deacons would babysit. It was a technique for us to have fun, but it was also a way of getting new members. So he announced that the deacons would babysit. We had a regular telephone committee of hunting up people, and somebody, maybe me, wrote a piece about it for a religious magazine about the deacons babysitting. And Joe Clark was so cute, he said in church, "This is a great idea. I went through everything the Noyces had in their refrigerator. Oh, there was some awfully good food in there."